أينما كنا أينما صرنا قلنا لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to my first discussion video. Today I want to talk to you all about the topic of Islamic fiction and Muslim fiction. Now, some people like to use the terms interchangeably for one broad category, but I personally like to make a distinction between the two. This can cause some controversy, but today I'm going to explain to you why. Before we begin, I would like to first state the obvious. For any story to be truly considered as Muslim or Islamic fiction, there are two main conditions that should be met. Namely, the story should 1. Be written by an actual Muslim, duh, and 2. Feature one or more Muslim characters, duh again. Ignore the sirens, please. I live in front of a busy road, so you will hear traffic in the background. I apologize. Anyways, to me, this is just one of those things that requires #own voices to truly fit the criteria. With that said, let's break down the difference between Muslim fiction and Islamic fiction. There really is only one major difference, but it matters greatly and can be broken down further upon examination for further understanding. Islamic fiction should ultimately be about showcasing and relaying some aspect of the message of Islam itself. The religion of Islam is on display. As for Muslim fiction, this should follow the narrative of someone who follows the religion of Islam, i.e. a Muslim. It doesn't need to cover the textual facts about Islam itself and all of the guidelines. It tells the story of someone who believes in them and practices them to some degree. The reader isn't necessarily meant to learn what Islam is about, but more so on what the life of a Muslim is like. And this can vary depending on what type of story you're telling, where it's set at, and what type of Muslim you're meaning to present. With Muslim fiction, it can be a reflection piece on the community you grew up in, whether they practice Islam as it is, or mixed in culture, what circumstances they faced, and all of that. The character need not know or practice all of the rules and obligations, and there doesn't necessarily have to be an explanation given for the rules. To give a bit of an example, in Muslim fiction, there might come a scene where it's mentioned that a character was late to a meeting because they had to stop and pray somewhere, and that's the extent of that. In Islamic fiction, the purpose is more served by explaining a bit of what the prayer is like, or what the purpose of it is, and how it's an obligation, whether the character always performs it or not. In Islamic fiction, part of the goal should be to make it a form of da'wah. I'm not saying that anyone has to preach to people in their stories, but there should be something educational about the religion of Islam. That can be in big or small matters, beliefs, values, and morals, from tawheed and taqwa to tawakkul and tawbah, whatever concept someone chooses to teach about. But there should be something there, and it should come from an established, proper Islamic source. With Muslim fiction, like I said before, the focus is on the practice and habits of Muslims. This doesn't mean that one can't explore in depth certain Islamic concepts and practices as they develop their character and the plot. If your story features a Muslim woman and a part of her character is that she struggles to wear hijab or doesn't quite understand the concept at all, there's nothing stopping you from dedicating a little bit of time to teach her, and by default, the audience, about its true meaning and purpose. You just don't have to if it doesn't fit the plot of the story. And don't get me wrong, neither of these two categories has to be strictly educational. That's not what I'm saying at all. And they don't have to be limited as standalone genres either. You can still write Islamic fiction in a book classed as fantasy, or a thriller novel, or romance, or sci-fi, etc., etc. Same for Muslim fiction. In fact, if you want your work to be impactful, you should delve into those other categories, minding Islamic boundaries for certain elements prominent in them, and you should explore them from a Muslim or Islamic background. For Muslim fiction, it can really be a tool to open the eyes of those around us, to tell our stories for fellow Muslims and non-Muslims alike to read and appreciate, to relate to, and learn about. With the various cultures of Muslim authors in the community, it really brings a great opportunity for us to share experiences and relate to one another, because even when the stories are fictional, art imitates life, right? So by all means, write Muslim fiction. Tell the stories of Muslims living in this world, or an alternate one if that's the kind of story that you're writing, and let the people understand who we are and what at least some of us are like. As for Islamic fiction, same thing. Tell your creative and unique stories, but bear in mind the lessons and morals you want to display. Keep at least one underlying Islamic theme and educate your readers on Islamic beliefs and practices, whether your character is a devout adherent to them or not. You can show how that affects their life, how it affects their worldview, and ultimately, how we should reflect on the lessons ourselves. Islamic fiction and Muslim fiction are two unique categories, both with their benefits and both important for us to have. I say this not with the intention of discriminating against certain authors or to put their works down, but to highlight the different aspects of each category and show why we class some things as Islamic and others as just Muslim. I hope this message is understood, and I hope we can all open our minds to benefit and see it from a new perspective. That's about all I have for today. I wanted to keep my first episode brief, but I am eager to know, do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? Do you want to add more to it? Something I missed out on? This is a conversation, so leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and let's talk about it. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, one last note. I forgot to cover something that I feel is actually pretty crucial to this conversation and the topic as a whole, so I just wanted to throw this in before I upload and we begin discussing everything. In the beginning, I mentioned two conditions for a story to be considered Islamic fiction or Muslim fiction in my eyes, and I just want to elaborate one consequence of that opinion. So, I said that for a work to be considered Muslim fiction or Islamic fiction, the author needs to be Muslim, and at least one character needs to be Muslim. So firstly, on the character part, this doesn't mean the character must initially be Muslim. For example, if the story is about a revert, then he or she doesn't have to be a Muslim the entire story. You could literally end the story with them saying the Shahada, and that technically means there was no main Muslim character until the very end. But Islam will have been present throughout the book, I would assume, for the character to get to the point of embracing the religion. So it still works. And on to the second and more controversial part of this note, in making this distinction with the two qualifications I mentioned at the beginning, this means that some works that others consider to be Muslim or Islamic fiction are excluded from those categories, in my opinion. I'm not here to call out any authors or put anyone's works down, but I just don't feel that certain books should be called Muslim fiction when there are no Muslims in the story. If Islam is non-existent in a novel, how can it be called Islamic? Even if the author herself or himself is a Muslim, if they didn't write about Muslims, then their work isn't a Muslim story. It can be a Muslim's story, apostrophe S, but not Muslim fiction. And this includes the works where the society is based on a reflection of the people and culture of the author's Muslim background. If the characters themselves are not meant to be Muslims, or if the religion of Islam is just absent from the story completely, then it's not Muslim and it's not Islamic. Muslim-inspired culture, rituals, and names aren't enough to categorize something as Islamic. If I throw some sand on a plate and put it next to some water, I can call it beach-inspired, but it's not a beach. If I paint a tennis ball red like an apple, I can't feed it to you and tell you it's an apple just because I happen to grow real apples in my backyard. I have to give you an actual apple for it to be an apple. Get what I'm saying? So there are plenty of books out there in various genres that many people find interesting, and they're adapted from certain cultures and lands that are inhabited by Muslims, but the stories don't have an ounce of anything Islamic, and the characters aren't Muslims at all. These can be great ethnic tales, but they're not representative of Muslims or Islam if those aren't showcased in them. And just to make it clear, I hold the same opinion on stories that are written by non-Muslims and happen to have one or two Muslim characters, although this one I can see people trying to put more loopholes into. So, whatever. Anyways, these are all just my opinions. I've shared what I had to say, and once again, you're all welcome to agree or disagree or elaborate further. Let's discuss this down in the comments below. Thank you all for listening, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أينما صرنا قلنا لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله